India is making a major trade push in Canada this week. Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal is leading a delegation of more than 100 business and industry representatives, with stops in Ottawa and Toronto over the next 3 days. At the center of the visit, a goal to grow two-way trade to $70 billion by 2030, a target announced in March during Prime Minister Mark Carney's trip to India. For Canada, it's an attractive prospect. India is already the world's third largest consumer market, according to the World Bank, worth more than $2 trillion and one of the world's fastest growing major economies. So what is at stake for both Canada and India, and can both countries move past recent political tensions to get a deal done? Victor Thomas is the president and CEO of the Canada-India Business Council. Mr. Thomas, thanks very much for making time for us. Appreciate it.
Great pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So this is being described as the largest ever business delegation that India has sent to any country. What does that tell you about how India views its economic relationship with Canada right now?
Well, as you mentioned, Prime Minister Carney was there in March, and several of us were there along with him. And there's a seismic change in terms of the relationship. And so both countries now are looking at all kinds of different ways to find possibilities to do more bilateral trade and bilateral investment. And this is a clear sign of that. And I think Canada's also talking about sending a significant delegation now to India this fall.
And there is that target I mentioned of reaching $70 billion in bilateral trade by 2030. How realistic do you think that goal is, and what sectors should we expect to drive that kind of growth?
It's certainly ambitious. And of course, as the Canada-India Business Council, we're excited and we're happy to see some ambition in this relationship. It is going to be fueled, given the geopolitical nature of the world right now, with things like agriculture, things like energy, and there's lots of also opportunities around tech and also in the financial space with bilateral investment.
You mentioned kind of the global context, and obviously for Canada, India does represent a massive and a fast-growing consumer market at a time when Ottawa is seeking to diversify away from the United States, but also seeking to deepen trade ties with China. So what role do you see India playing for Canada in that overall broader context between those other two major great powers?
Well, India is the most populous nation on earth, and of course, is also the largest, fastest growing economy. And so if you're looking for growth, India is where it's at. And it's not just going to be for the next 5 years or 10 years. This is, for the next number of decades. And so when you look at the two countries, we have quite complementarity in terms of what we have and what we need. India has a large population. India needs better food. India needs more fertilizer. India needs different kinds of energy to make sure that they get a taste of the quality of life that we probably often take for granted in this country. And it is growing on the back of those in some of the most challenging socioeconomic categories rising up and coming into the middle class.
Now, according to reporting from Politico, India's Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal, who is leading this delegation, he is seen as widely seen as a tough negotiator. According to Politico, there was a former EU official who had negotiated with him for years, who said he is, quote, a showbiz personality and deliberately provocative. Former U.S. Trade Representative Bob Lighthizer has called India protectionist, saying it's just part of the country's political DNA. What do you make of those comments, and what that potentially means for Canada as these talks move forward? What challenges could that create for the negotiations?
Well, we've been at this for a long time. We started these talks originally back in 2010, resuscitated in 2022. There's a number of rounds of negotiation, but there's right now a renewed optimism because both prime ministers, top down, are saying this is going to happen. And in the time that we've been doing it, if you just look the last few years, the EU, the US got an agreement, not a comprehensive agreement, but the UK, New Zealand, Australia, all have trade agreements with India. And so we may have started first. Hopefully we can build off of all those other agreements and hopefully end up with the best.
Yeah, you mentioned they've been at it for a while. I think it's going back to 2010 since those trade talks were underway. And you mentioned that they picked up again in 2022. Of course, a little more than a year ago, renewed trade talks between Canada and India seemed highly unlikely. It was only in 2023 that then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau accused the Indian government of being involved in the killing of Sikh activist Hardeep Singh Nijjar in British Columbia. Prime Minister Carney has since described India as a natural partner when it comes to trade, but to what extent do you think those tensions when it comes to foreign interference and the Sikh separatist movement here in Canada, to what extent do you think they could further complicate economic ties and these talks as they proceed forward?
Well, look, the world has changed on a number of different fronts, and you've shown, the Prime Minister has shown leadership on this file by saying, on the economic front, on the trade and investment, we have to be tied to the world's fastest large growing economy. And, he followed up with that by going to India again in March and also putting some very ambitious targets. You talked about the trade numbers. You talked about getting this trade deal done this year, not out in 2030 or 2035, this year. So there seems to be political fortitude and conviction that this needs and can be done. And by having Minister Goyal from India here this week with such a large delegation, I think that shows significant interest from the Indian side. And of course, and again, it looks like we'll be sending a significant delegation of Canadian leaders, business leaders to India this fall to show also from the Canadian side that we're serious. And again, these things are all nice. At the end of the day, we want to see transactions and deals get done, which are the ultimate measurement for an economic relationship.
Mm-hmm. And just in closing, beyond a possible deal this year, what could a stronger economic relationship between Canada and India mean over the longer term for both countries, do you think?
Well, when you look at just at a high level, Canada is an export-driven economy, so we must export. India has a insatiable appetite to consume. And as I talked about, this huge middle class that's arising, and they're going to need a lot of goods and necessities like food and energy, but also a lot of goods just again to help improve their overall lifestyle. And I think Canada can actually provide a lot of those things. We see, I was just there in February with 20 university presidents. Education is one of those things that not just on partnerships, not just on bringing Indian students to Canada, but also providing all kinds of different service options to that growing market over there as well. So on a number of fronts, there's significant opportunities. It is not as close as some markets, but it is the largest population-wise and the fastest large economy from a growth perspective. And again, not just for 5 or 10 or 15 years, this has significant upside that will hopefully raise the prosperity of both countries.
Okay, well, we'll certainly watch closely to see how the talks unfold. Victor Thomas, President and CEO of the Canada-India Business Council, thanks again for your time today. Much appreciated.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you so much.